Okay, so getting your team involved in ethical research and design. So design decisions, especially related to technology, have wide-ranging impacts on people, and they're embedded in our everyday life. So work, home, play, communication, transportation, floor production, everything with it. And with technology just being so integrated and part of how products and services are being delivered, then those research and design decisions that we're making about products and services and technology are really important. And I focus on the part about the technology because technology allows us to scale, and it helps us to, have far-reaching positive impacts, but it also has far-reaching negative impacts. So that's what we really need to think about those things. And so how we research and design products, services, and technology really make a difference. And so let's look at a couple of examples of sort of like what can go wrong, and then we'll look into some activities of how we can uh, uh, incorporate in ethical research and inclusive design, and incorporate that in with your team. So I don't know if you all had heard that the IRS recently was going to use facial recognition software by the company ID.me to, you could file your taxes without using it, but if you wanted to, say, get your tax transcript or something and have an online account with the IRS, they were going to require you to submit to this facial recognition software to be able to do that. Where there was, of course, a lot of backlash with it, and some senators and things got involved, and okay, no, they're not going to do that now. But before it was that decision had been made, the IRS had actually directed 7 million people to you to register for ID.me, so for this the process with it. So just the saying, this numbers are massive. So while we don't have to worry about the IRS right now, there are still 18 federal agencies and 21 state agencies, particularly like federal homeland security and different things like that. But then state agencies like unemployment insurance are using facial recognition software. And so what's the harm about this? And when we think about, well, ethical research and design, is that it's been shown that facial recognition software misidentifies women and people of color at higher rates than white males. Uh, Using this with this ID.me company, that's a private company that has huge realms of your personal information now. So then that's somewhere, and is it secure? Who are they going to be shared with? They have a long privacy policy, and all kinds of things that you have to sign off on. But do you really understand how is it going to be shared, how it could be harmed, how it could harm you, who is it being sold to? So like that's one way in which, when we think about, have we considered, when we people are designing this type of software or saying they want to implement it, like what is the harm that could happen to people using it? Because we certainly have had instances where people have been wrongfully arrested because they have been misidentified by the facial recognition software, and nobody wants that. So that's a way that you're thinking about it. Did they really think about, when they started initiating these types of software, uh, what the harm was and what kind of mitigation was being used to not have that harm? Another example is genderfy, and this was introduced on Product Hunt. I think it was summer of 2020, and it was being marketed to businesses that they would be able to, if they had a customer's email or their social media handle, like their name, then they would be able to identify the gender of the person just by that. So like this example here on the right that said Ms. Jones Smith, that was identifying that that was 94.10%.
Oh, Lisa, sorry, we're still on the first slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to catch
Oh,
everybody up.
oh, so I never moved it. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So we, so I'm looking at this as I'm talking, and it's we had never got there. Can you see it now? Is any moving?
Just the first slide.
Okay, you know what? It's mine.
I see your mouse. There we go.
Okay, all
There we go.
right.
Now we're in the
Sorry.
facial recognition.
I recently rejiggered my displays and things, so I guess I am still catching up. So I do apologize. So genderfy, I appreciate that. So in this example, Mrs. Jones Smith, that was uh saying that it census was 94% male versus 5% female. Now, wow, this is like this is like a bad idea that should never have gone out in the world. It was introduced at Product Hunt, and thankfully, within like a week or so, they had so much backlash um, that they closed it down. But this software was ignoring non-binary people. It was making assumptions about people based on someone by their name, on what their gender is, and then on top of all that horrifying thing, then it was going to create inaccurate databases of information. And I don't know about you all, but how challenging is it to try to get a database corrected with bad information, and it just spreads and spreads and spreads. So like when you think about this, like who thought of this and who thought that this was a good idea, right? And it certainly didn't seem like it had any inputs of really diverse people who would be able to uh, give different perspectives on why this would not be a good idea. And this was being marketed to business to say can help you clear up your customer information, help you market better to customers, right? Horrible idea. Did not, fortunately, it did not stay in the marketplace. But a week or so, but they were giving out 1,000 free credits a day. So I mean, I don't know how many people used it in that time and have this information now, but okay, not a good idea. Uh, no inclusive design or ethical research was going on to come up with this. Definitely not. Next up, this was when you go to the hospital and you're going to be discharged, then they're using um, a tool that helps physicians determine whether or not you need follow-up care with it. So very important. You're getting out of the hospital. You want to continue your path of recovery. Well, this tool was inaccurately classifying 82% of white patients as needing more care than 18% of Black patients who were just as sick or sicker, just as sick or even sicker than that. And what the problem with this was is that they really just didn't understand the context of healthcare and the disparities in it because of the fact that they were using data from insurance records. But if you understand that the historical disparities in healthcare, access to insurance and affordability, as well as mistrust in the healthcare system based on mistreatment of people of color, then you would know that there would be there would be different amounts of people who had health insurance based on race. And if you're going to use those healthcare records, then you're going to bake in that bias and continue it along with it. So one, they just didn't really understand the context of what they were designing, and nor did they understand the types of patients and having the types of patients that would be using it. They were not having a broad and inclusive research and design participants to even understand what they were building with it. So horrible outcome. They've made some corrections in it, but still, how do we get here with it? Oftentimes, sorry, oftentimes with it is because that people aren't using ethical research and inclusive design practices. So ethical research is, and I've got these definitions from Nielsen Norman Group, just to always try to have a definition to sort of give you a North Star where we're trying to go. Ethical research means careful consideration of the rights, well-being, and dignity of people involved in research activities. And then inclusive design means to create products that understand, enable people of all backgrounds, abilities, like age, culture, economic situation, education, gender, geographical location, language, race, uh, all of them to be able to include all of them and include their needs in designing a product or a service or technology with it. So fundamentally, we need to be one, understanding the people that we are trying to design a product for or could be impacted by it. And then also with it, we need to understand and appreciate that they have rights. They are entitled to dignity, and they're entitled to not be harmed by whatever we are creating with it. So how does this work? How do you do that? So broadly, and it depends on what type of organization that you have, you and where you are now, you may need an organizational change management approach. If it's something that this is sort of not baked into your company ethics, you don't have full support of it, you need to think of it like an organizational change management, just like companies come up when they say, well, we're going to do a digital transformation, or we're going to, be innovative, or we're going to have some big shift in the company. They take an organizational change management approach to it. They get an executive to sponsor it. Hey, this is important. I'm supporting it. I'm putting my weight around it. You have to get stakeholders aligned that this is important and how this connects to the goals and success of the company. So, is it profitability? Is it helping with our mission, our target audience, education around why this is important? We have to have robust communication channels. So communicating, from that executive sponsor and these stakeholders, why this is important, where we're going with it, and why we're doing this. And then you have to assign clear responsibility within the organization for it. So, are you having, a ethics officer, or are you having research guidelines and approvals and sign-offs on particular research to make sure that they are abiding by ethical standards with it? You have to invest the time into proactively identifying potential harm. And that's part of like what we're going to do today in these activities, is that proactive identification of potential harms. The important part of it is we have to resolve misalignment. So if you're incentivizing people to make money hand over foot no matter what happens, then you're probably not going to get that, are we going to be ethical? Are we being inclusive with it? So how do we align that? Are we able to align success metrics with things that also have things that are about helping the community or helping sustainability, or not exacerbating bias with it? Like, is that connected to what we consider success? That's important. Is it part of the company values? That's encouraging with it. But then also, like, especially technology and with, agile and get it out fast. Is it getting it out so fast that we aren't looking at these types of things Like, how do we align that? So that's a big long-term things that we have to do. And you have to look at your organization and see where the weak spots are in these types of things with it. But, I, say that because I want people to know that it is a um, it is a multi-step approach to it, right? I mean, we're going to approach it on different projects, but you still have to have that support and structure in the organization to be able to really have success with it. If people are going to get a bonus for shipping it quick, no matter what happens, then it's really hard to say, put on the brakes and let's look and see what we're doing and what we're putting out in the marketplace with it. But okay, so that's the organizational change manager approach. Well, what can you do as your team and as individuals? Uh, Part of that is investing in the proactive identification of potential harm. And and so how do you do that? Well, I think you start with frameworks and checklists and ethical guidelines so you can be more systematic about identifying issues, right? You know, not just like coming into the the room and like now we out of virtually coming into the virtual room and we're just sort of throwing out ideas. How are we being more systematic about potential issues, right? So that we can make sure we're covering a good span of what potentially happens. And there are many different checklists and ethical guidelines, and you can look at and see what applies more to your organization. So Alba of the Mall has the ethical researchers checklist. Uh, Carol Smith and Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, they have a designing ethical AI experiences, a checklist and agreement that you can look at. The Association of Computer and Machinery has a code of ethics. There are other different private companies that have their own either design ethics or AI ethics that you can look at. Montreal has a responsible AI declaration as well. So looking at and working with frameworks so you can sort of be more systematic at identifying issues, right? Then you have to have conversations and examine your product or service or technology and what the impact is. And sometimes they're going to be kind of difficult conversations, but you have to have them. And why the conversations are important is because that a product or service or technology doesn't have to be just all bad or all good. So let's think of some technology that may have really good benefits, but it may also have really negative benefits. So say for instance, like technology that say for monitoring. So you have something where you can monitor if your child it's 10 or 11 and you want to make sure that uh, you know where they are, right? You don't want anything to happen to them. You just, for their safety. Well, that's 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 good. But what if you're using that for to monitor a spouse or adult, right? And using it that way, then that's just being misused, right? And so we have to look at whether or not what's the potential for things to be misused with it. How easy is that being done with it as well? We can think about things like still on the monitoring thing for something, like the ring doorbells, and you have them, and because people, they're these porch pirates to steal your packages. And so, hey, nobody, that's not right. You don't want anybody stealing anybody's packages. But if your ring doorbell, it can see right across the street to your neighbor's house, and over time you have 2 or 3 months of their activity on your camera, and all of a sudden you say something happens and you give it to the police, then all of a sudden they have monitoring of this person's house, right? Like, and who knows what they could, be using it with. And is that okay, right? So we have to consider how things could be used or misused with it, and what the implications are with it. We also implications with it, because it could be used for good. It's not always clear cut, right? But you also want to explore the context and important nuances uh, of potential users, and want to focus specifically on, at least for me, I have a focus on vulnerable or marginalized groups, looking at uh, groups that are typically have been socially or economically disenfranchised, then that's important, because typically they are not always represented within the research and design teams or in the research participant pools of when we're developing these products. And so therefore we need to make sure that we are surfacing up any types of things that could potentially harm them. And then we have to really commit to iterating, mitigating, or eliminating when there's harm. Like if something's happening that this is just not being used properly or used to harm people, then we need to stop it. So I think about a situation with Snapchat, that they had a filter uh, or
Sorry, are we
something
still on the
where,
same slide? I just wanted to make sure.
yes, on the same side. I've just
Same
given an
slide. Okay.
example where they would record people as they were driving, right? And it was encouraging people to speed, and they had several crashes on it, right? And this went on for a few years, and people said, hey, this shouldn't have you know this people recording. This is just encouraging people to go faster and faster with it. Like, you're not going to record if you're going 15, right? You're going to record if you're going 115. I mean, that's just you know makes sense. But they did not stop at that for several years, and then when they did, it was because, well, people really weren't using it anymore. But like, where was the point of, okay, we're doing harm, why are we continuing to do this with it? So you really have to be able to say, to commit, uh, to iterate, mitigate, or eliminate. And that goes back to having that um, part of or organizational change approach that you're going to have, that buy-in throughout the organization, and how it's supporting um, the company's mission and values. Is it supporting what what is being incentivized with it? So make sure that we there isn't a financial reason or something why someone would continue to do harm, because they only did away with it when it wasn't as popular anymore, right? So what can you do? So what
Can I ask
can
a
you do?
question?
Yeah.
Sorry, are the slides supposed to move, or are we still on this one slide?
You don't see category of harm?
No, ma'am.
Oh, wow. Someone sees it?
We're still on the how may need an organizational change management approach. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Thank you, Jen.
Let me.
No worries.
All right. Let me start again. 1 second. And just try. Okay. I'm going to do. What do you see now? Do you see
Categories
categories?
of harm.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure what happened with that. I do apologize. Uh, so in thinking about, well, how do we approach this? How do we, get your team involved in ethical research and design? Well, one is that, like I said, is about those frameworks for proactively identifying potential harms, and then, being committed to mitigating, or, iterating, mitigating, or eliminating harm. So one of this is this a list of categories of harm, so that you can look at us, be very systematic on looking at uh, your product or service and seeing how it could potentially um, negatively impact someone. And it's kind of like, some people have like the Black Mirror exercises or like abusability exercises with it. But it's like, well, how could this product be used negatively? So, like financial, so can have a negative impact on finances, property, or resources. So, thinking about like the Robinhood app and how, I don't know if anybody read when they settled with, I think, was it the Securities and Exchange Commission? It may not be them, because I think this was before they they went public. So I can't think of what agency it was. But if you read their the press release of what the app, what the Robinhood was doing, like they didn't even know in some cases what the algorithm was doing. And they were allowing people who were really the targeting inexperienced users, and uh, letting them do really risky trades where they could potentially lose a lot of money with it, and not having adequate customer service or support options for people to be able to, figure out what's going on and potentially, stop the bleed with it. So that's a way you're thinking about what financial harm. So, as a product team, when you're looking at this and saying, hey, we want an app, and we want to be able to target and have, you know, younger people and get them involved, in the stock market, and we have to really think about, well, how could that go wrong financially for them? Like, are they in a position that they really could lose financially, and what are the safeguards with it? So that's, want to look at things like that, or like health. um, you know the CEO of Netflix years ago said uh, their only real competition was sleep. So you actually need sleep to be healthy, right? And they're competing with your sleep. So part of the things that they do is uh, do things to suggest that you look at more, to do more binge watching, to keep you on the platform longer with it. And so you have to think about that. Is that really, what you should be doing with it? Uh, but other things like time, um, think about how many, like now we have so many technologies that don't offer adequate support. And so if you have a problem, then you wind up, if you are lucky enough to be able to call, you wind up on the phone for hours at a time trying to get something resolved, right? So how much of your time have they sucked away from you? And think about like the different things, subscriptions and things that you sign up for, and they only allow you to cancel if you actually call. And again, that's sucking a whole lot of time up with it. But they'll let you sign up for it online, but they don't uh, allow you to cancel online as well with it. So are we able to do the same, a yes transaction or no transaction on the same platform, or are they requiring your time to be able to say no with it? Or thinking about fairness and equity. So if we're having platforms that have different kinds of forms and you aren't monitoring them properly enough, and so therefore there becomes a you know a a online uh gang that sort of is perpetuating abuse on one group or another because we haven't did a adequate enough monitoring of it. So it's all different types of areas that if you're going to start looking at your product or service or technology, and look at these areas and categories of harm to see, really identify, is this a way that this could potentially harm someone with it? Um, Lost my train of thought for a second. So potentially could harm somewhat with it. So for our next exercise, oh, I know what my thought was. Sorry about that. This is not all the harms in the world, right? There could be many more, right? But these are, these hit on, quite a few significant areas with it. And then certainly, there are other areas that you can identify with it, then definitely supplement this list. But these are important aspects of life. And so these are categories of harm that you need to systematically look at for your to make sure that your product or service or technology is not negatively impacting anyone. So next up, we're going to try this out for ourselves. So let's see. Now I'm crossing my fingers that when I click, oh, one second. New screen. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is the link that Barry put in the chat earlier, and this takes us to the mural board. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 5 minutes, and I want you to look at the list. And if you're in Mural, you should be able to see. Let's see. 1 second. I'm just trying to get the mural myself. Are you able to see the mural
Yes,
on
now
the
we can see the
screen?
mural. We can see your screen.
Okay, so what we're going to do is with 5 minutes is to look at the categories and come up with example of yourself that you can find of a product or service that causes financial harm or health with it. And what'll be helpful is to put like the name of the category first, and then write in what it, uh, what the example is. So, like for instance, I had financial, and then I wrote the Robin Hood that allows novice users to engage in risky trades with little safeguards. So we're going to go through that and see if you can come up with, one or two uh, that you can come up with. Did anybody have any trouble getting in Mural? What? Didn't hear anything. So hopefully that would be great because
Hi, Lisa. I have a doubt.
yeah.
Do we need to write everything in the visible screen, or it's something written as team one, team two? So, like,
In the visual screen. Thanks for asking. Our second exercise will be the team one,
oh,
team
okay.
two
Okay.
at the
Thank
bottom.
you. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Lisa, this is Jan. I am having trouble with my mural. I don't know for some reason. Well, maybe I'll try it on Chrome because Safari it's been spinning forever.
Yeah, I think
Well,
that someone I had testing it out earlier had some trouble with Safari. So yeah,
okay,
please try Chrome.
okay.
And if you totally have trouble, then you could just put it in the chat and we can work with
Okay.
it, you know.
Okay, it worked on Chrome. Thank you.
Okay, great.
All right, 5 more minutes. Looking good so far.
Okay. Does everybody put in at least one thing?
I think so.
Yep. Okay. What- Well, so for this activity, let's look at a few of them and examples. Take a minute or two and read some of them. And I love to hear, um, what example, if there's an example, something that surprised you or something you'd like to learn more about um, within here.
I've never heard of Splitwise, so I'm curious what that is.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of it either. Could someone share
Yeah.
more on that?
Hi, this is Hashmita. So I'm the one who just mentioned it. So Splitwise is something that you can share your expenditures with your friends or family. So in case if we are both going together for a restaurant or shopping, so we can split the money in uh, in an app that's known as a Splitwise, where it's very transparent that you can see if person is editing it, or if the person is changing the money, or if the person is adding something. So and it helps you to record and take a picture of the bill and then post it there. It has different categories like your internet services, house rent. So in case if you're staying with a roommate, so you can maintain your record in the Splitwise.
Okay. And so you think that's potentially like how could it harm someone? Fairness and equity. Is it you're saying that you feel like that it's very positive for fairness and equity?
Yes, I wrote that into a positive note that it's very transparent and fairness that every person in your account have ability to see everything. So I feel that other apps should also have the fairness and transparency like Splitwise.
Now I look, so uh I'm thinking about there was a recent book Design for Safety. And one of the things that it was talking about was that say for instance, uh say someone was using this app and they had a spouse, or they were using this app with some friends, but they have a spouse or a partner, and they're uh, looking in to see how they're spending their money, right? Like, so it could be very good far as fairness for between the friends, but is it something that maybe could be misused for the other party to you know, control how they spend their money, right? Or something like that. And I mean, and it's not to say with all of these things that you can design it so it doesn't, the people can't do all of these things, but there's something to consider about that with it. Uh, and someone I think was saying, so does exclude people who are not tech savvy to be able to do that as well. Is it another uh, example? I see a lot about Facebook around time and privacy, um, but is it another one that someone is surprised about or something they have concern about that they saw on here?
I can talk about TaskRabbit.
Okay.
As a woman, I ordered a TaskRabbit, like not order. Yeah, I went through the chatting on the app, and then the person didn't show up on time, and I complained about that person, but they had already had my address and my apartment number. So if they wanted to retaliate on me, because I had to give them such a bad review, they were so utterly unprofessional. But by that time, they already knew where I lived, and I'm a single woman who lives, in an apartment, right? And then on top of that, yeah, and then when I got the other person to come, I realized like I'm in this apartment alone with this guy, anything could happen. So that's TaskRabbit for me.
Definitely, definitely. And I think about a lot of times with platforms and things like that, and people want to have a forum and everybody wants you to have a profile and put up your picture and things like that. but then, depending on gender or race or things like that, then sometimes it is in those settings where people are more bullied than others, right? And so maybe one group is not um, is not enjoying that social aspect as much as another group, because they are maybe part of the group that is sort of being bullied with it. And so, like, do you have to have your profile picture, right? On here? Do you have to use your real name? Things like that with it. That
Actually,
goes.
I don't use my real name on Uber because of that.
Okay, see, yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of can potential things, and we have to think about it with it, like next door, when they first came out and people were reporting people, and they were finding that people were reporting people, in that they look suspicious because they didn't look like them, right? And so then they tried to put in, a feature to help people to have more consideration when they are reporting something, that is based on factual information versus just because someone doesn't look like you with it. But again, that was something then in design that they that know that sort of these things can happen with it. So with this activity, how could you use this for your team? So one of the things is that sometimes it's hard to examine what you're working on, a potential idea or something you already have in the marketplace, and people may feel kind of defensive about it. So you can use this as a sort of a warm up to say, hey, you know, we've heard all the stories, just like I've showed some bad examples. um, let's look at some products and things like that, and sort of examine what kind of harm that uh, could be occurring to people, and sort of get people talking about different things at first, and then as a warm up, and then we can go and say, well, okay, let's examine this potential idea that we have, and look at what financial consequences could it have, how that safety might be really important with it, and go through that. But having this first step where you're talking about other things kind of can make it a little bit easier. And then also the step of everybody adding something to the board uh, separately at first helps in situations where sometimes you have a few people who control the conversation or are very dismissive of things. Then you at least have that information out, and maybe you can start to see uh, themes, or you'll be able to see people who are uh, having some similar concerns than you are, who maybe if it's we're just speaking, people may not initially like speak up to the highest paid person in the room and say, hey, I really have concerns about this. So this is a good warm-up activity to get people thinking about areas in which harm could occur. And you do it on neutral, not your product or service or technology at first, and then you can come back, and on the second round, then you're looking at, hey, this is this new idea we have. Let's look at it and see uh, where we might have areas of concern with it. Do any of y'all do something like that, like more systematic, that you're looking at different specific areas and trying to identify issues, or is it more of a people bring up concerns that they have?
I think like one exercise that has been really useful in my experience, sort of like tackle, this type of thinking has been like to, kind of like involve participants in co-designing sessions, and try to have like a a good representation. Of course, like you can involve like, you know, 1,000 people, but make sure you involve people that kind of like represent different, you know, different social groups, and, you know, that have different perspectives. And that I think it's a very helpful practice, because a lot of the companies that we have here, like Uber, Facebook, or Taskrabbit, or Airbnb, even, like the design idea was born before then they could ask themselves questions about like the ethical consequence, like you said, exactly what you said, like, you know, what is this kind of like leading to? But I think they also come from kind of like, you know, if we think about like TaskRabbit or like, you know, Uber, I think they come, like, the idea of the service comes from a good place, because it's essentially like sharing of skills and resources. And so it's really like leveraging, empowering the community. But of course we don't live in a in a safe world. So we need to ask ourselves these questions.
Definitely. And I think you hit on like what I was trying to say before, is that, you know, things can be, you know, be for good and they have a positive impact, but then there could be something negative about it. So we need to consider it. And maybe there's some iteration of how you do that and present it out in the marketplace that protects, you know. So you know, that's where the conversations and sort of the nuances that you start to talk about, and people bringing in different experiences helps to get more clarity on that.
Mhm.
So let's go on to, and I am going to try to share my screen again to, okay, go back. I've never had such a horrible time with my sharing before, so I'm sorry to treat you all to this experience. Let's see. What do we see now?
We see the 3Q do no harm framework.
Okay, but we see it within the other things, right?
That's okay. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. Please excuse me. So the 3Q do no harm framework, this is something that I developed in 2019, because as I was seeing more and more of these issues of problematic stories out in the marketplace, or things that I was experiencing, and I felt really powerless. Like, what do we do about this? And I kept reading different books on, you know, different issues, like it's one, automating inequality, how we police profile, police, and punish the poor. And this book, it took me a year to read it, because when I first saw the title, I knew it was going to upset me, and I was like, oh, I can't handle this, right? But I went on and read it, and it did upset me, but it also kind of galvanized me to say, well, what can we do about this? And so as I looked out and started looking at examples, I felt like I saw a few things that were common throughout some of them. One was around who was able to input into the idea or the product. So the product team, who's not here? Is it that inclusive team that we have different perspectives that are able to help guide and understand nuances around a product area, you know, and things like, no, and everybody doesn't have a credit card, right? And is, you know, things like that. So like, do we have inclusive teams? And that's what I came up with, that this first question, because the 3Q do no harm framework is 3 questions. And the 3 questions, I know sounds like, oh, 3 questions cannot, you know, answer all of what this area is, and they cannot. But this is sort of a starting point to get some structure around common issues with it. and to be able to, again, sort of be more systematic at looking at what areas are problems. And so for that first question, who's not here, it's about, well, are we having inclusive teams so that we're bringing in diverse inputs? But then also, are we having diverse research participants? So, we have this idea, but are we actually um, re- doing research with a broad enough set of people that we can get in and understand some of these nuances and understand where things may go wrong and what needs our different groups are, and that gets into that inclusive research, right? With it. So that's question number one. Who's not here? Question number two goes to about impact. That a lot of times that when we have these products and services, especially because we haven't included and include a diverse group of participants or product team, then we just don't understand what the impact of it is negatively, because that's perhaps not our experience. So are we really looking at how vulnerable groups can be negatively impacted, and really going a step further and saying, well, what could be the unintended consequences of it, and to mitigate beforehand? And so that involves looking not only at your product and what the impact of it is, regardless of what group it is, but then also looking specifically at vulnerable groups and the constraints that they may have, and how your product could exacerbate harm within it. So if you're thinking about vulnerable groups, we may be thinking about people who may not have access to uh, technology or different financial resources, maybe different literacy skills, um, systematic bias, why they might not have power or access to power. So things like that. And so that is the second question. So how will vulnerable groups be negatively impacted? And really looking at that, examining it against the product or service or technology that you're proposing or having in the marketplace. And then the third step is when things don't work, how will they quickly resolve? Because a lot of times what I would see in these stores and things like that is people were surprised that this happened, and and kind of caught flat-footed, right? And so even if we do our best job with um, making sure we have, inclusive teams and research participants, and we really look at unintended consequences, and we make changes so the product is better. Sometimes things still do go wrong, and it is not intended to. But how do we make sure that we are able to quickly resolve them? So that means having strong communication paths uh, between when something is executed, right? You have strong customer service, a strong way to report when technology issues are occurring within it, and are you really monitoring it and making changes when things happen? So to make sure that people, when it's not the happy path, that everything didn't work perfectly, are they able to, be made whole and get a resolution quickly with it? And that's really important as well. And we have to, assume, as although we plan for the happy path, we have to also assume that sometimes there isn't a happy path and something's going to go wrong, and we have steps in place to alleviate the issues that a particular customer or a group may be having with it. So that's the 3Q do no harm framework. And it's a good starting point to at least try to tease out where our issues are. Is it around we don't have the proper inputs? So that's who's not here. Is it that we haven't really examined what could go wrong with it? Or that we don't have good resolutions when things don't go properly with it? So here, this is the framework, and we're going to go to our second exercise, and we're running a little bit behind, but we will do the best that we can with it. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. the breakout rooms, you'll be assigned to a breakout room. And if you go back to the mural board, if you're in breakout room 1, then you'll be on the mural board for team 1. You're on breakout room 2, you'll be in the breakout room for team 2 with it. And so we'll kind of do this a little fast, but what we're going to do is we're going to go into the, and I'll go back into, one second, I'll have to jump to get to that link again. All right, so, oh. Oops. All right. So if you're a team 1, you're going to get in your breakout room. And what you're going to do is take a quick minute, say your name, your current role or area of interest or study. And then going to take a couple of minutes to read the scenario here. So you see do you see right here where it says the Kool-Aid insurance scenario? Read that individually and then start populating the sticky notes under the 3 questions. So after you read the Kool-Aid insurance scenario, you're thinking like, I'm part of the product team for this, or the research or design team, and I need to understand, based on this scenario, who's not here, who do we need to consider, and you add that to the sticky notes. The second question: how will vulnerable groups be negatively impacted? So how could you think about how a group might be negatively impacted? And then the third one would be coming over to when things don't work out, how can they be quickly resolved? Kind of, if something is going wrong, what would be a quick resolution for that with it? So go into the breakout rooms, take a minute to introduce yourself. Let's say 5 minutes to at least populate something in one thing in each area with it. And then your group will start to talk about it and see any particular themes, things you hadn't considered, other questions that you might want to dig into a little bit deeper with it.
Okay, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and if excuse me, if I've missed anybody, just hang tight and we'll get you somewhere, but I think I've got everybody.
So how was that? Like, did someone bring up something that you hadn't considered in this scenario, or a group that you may have not considered?
Yeah, it was really hard. And one person in our group brought up that, well, we started talking about how can you claim, like, how can you read fraudulent facial expression? So then we started talking about how difficult that could be for so many different types of people, like people who are on the spectrum, or just aligning with one set of how facial expressions should look.
Absolutely, absolutely, definitely. Any other things that were like something that you what surprised you, or something you said I would need to look more into about this?
Yeah, we had like a little bit of talk about, like if something is going to be driven by AI like that, then it's based off some heuristics, and we instantly kind of asked, like, well, how was the AI model trained? Like what went into that, because everything downstream is going to be kind of guided by whatever rules are baked into that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And whatever, what they're basing it off is, it's still based off of something that a human did at some point, right? So the human bias is in it somehow, even whatever that the machine is coming up with. And then are they able to look in and actually see what it's doing and why it's doing it, and being able to make a formed decision on, is this working as it should be, or it shouldn't be. That examples I used were, AI related, but I mean, these could be used for things without AI. I tend to use them just because, I say AI has the best publicity in the world. It can solve every problem. And, if people are just selling it as if, nothing can go wrong with it. So I just, I try to put out the energy too, that we really need to look at these things a little bit differently. So I know we're running up on time, but I wanted to make a couple of points just to kind of close it up. So one was for the question, who's not here? It's not an exercise to say necessarily like people have to out themselves to say, well, okay, I can represent this group, because one person can't represent one group anyway, but it's just to keep putting in, like, we have a broad enough base that we have some different perspectives. And then we're sharing it out like that, and you see other people are bringing new ideas into it, then you get a broader perspective on it. But of course, with all research and design, we need to be working with, actual users and potential customers and potential end users, so that we can actually get their real perspective on that. Again, this exercise is really used to take the time to be systematic, to look at particular areas that can be of concern, taking that quiet moment at the beginning and everybody kind of putting out their ideas. Again, helps so that one person doesn't dominate the conversation and the direction, and other ideas that may not be as popular as I have some concerns about this, then they can get at least surfaced, right? And then you have that conversation about it. And then sort of when you do this exercise with your own like a product or service or a particular idea, then you get to the point where, okay, we brought all of these things out, then we have to start saying, well, what do we do about them? Because it's not just about asking the question, it's the answers. And then what do you do about it? So one next step is to start to prioritize, well, what do we need to address? And you start thinking about things like, how severe is this? Or how frequent? What's the risk? Do we need to know more before we can even decide what the priorities are, right? Like, do we need to do some more research? Do we need to bring in, compliance or legal with it, or something like that? Do we need to talk with other people and do more research on it before we can make a decision? So that might even be, we surface all this, but we need to come back at another time and look at and do the prioritization to figure out, well, what's the next step with it? Who else do we need to bring in the room so we can talk about and look at it? So both of these exercises is really to get people talking and to consider it with some kind of structured potential issues, and then then try to come up with, okay, next steps, more research, talking to other people, going back to the drawing board, all of those types of things with it. So I hope that was helpful. And the thing is not, with these exercises, like it's not to dwell out all of the things that could happen, but to get to see that people have different perspectives and things that you may not be thinking. And so therefore, that's why we need to have that inclusive research and to have ethical guidelines so that we aren't doing things that potentially could harm people. So I want to thank everyone. I'm not sure if you can see my screen that has my contact information, but if you don't, I can put it in the chat. Thank you for bearing with me with the PowerPoint not going the right way. But is any questions?
It's all good. If you could put the info in the chat, that would be great.
Okay, all right.
And I know that there were a bunch of people who had some questions in the chat. since we've run out of time, we're going to ask Lisa to maybe just answer those in writing, and we'll publish those either to the meetup or to the to somewhere where you can see them.
That sounds great. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I really appreciate it and hope that it was helpful.
It was incredible. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you all for joining us. And we will see you, hopefully, everybody next month.